Hi guys, this is Mike Hibbert back with another Python Django tutorial for you. This time we're going to cover the subject of how to extend the user model. And in previous tutorial we talked about how to register users and how to test for their logins and that sort of thing. This time around we're going to take it a little step further and show you how to add on extra information that the user model doesn't have out of the box. So the first thing we need to do to get started is to basically go into our Django project and create a new app called User Profile. And the reason why we're going to do this is because I'm going to make this app so that it's separate from the rest of the project in its own folder and structure, so that we can reuse it with other projects in the future. So we should be able to just drag and drop this app in and out of other projects, and with a few bits of configuration here and there it should work pretty well with any project that you use. So the first thing we do obviously is to create an app is to use the Django admin script that should be inside of your virtual env. And using the start app command, we're going to create user profile. Once you've done that, you should then get a folder full of the various basic files like views, URLs, etc. And once you've done that, then that's our project or our app created. Then we'll just need to basically fill in a few of the blanks, so to speak. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create open the settings.py file and add in the new app. So under our installed apps, we need to just add in a line just to say we're going to include this in the whole project. Now the next thing we need to do in order to tell Django that there's actually an extension to the user model is we need to basically add in a line to say that the auth profile module is contained inside of our user profile app, and it's called user profile. And then that should basically hook up to our data model that we're going to create in a second, which is basically going to be a model just called user profile that'll link in through the database to our user and allow us to tag on that extra information that we need to include. So we've set that inside the settings.py. That's all we need to do for the settings. The next thing we need to do is actually just to go and create the model. It's going to be a very basic model. I'm not going to make it very complicated. We're just going to add in a few fields just to demonstrate that how you can actually add in these extra bits of information that are associated with your user. So the first thing we need to do is just basically include the models framework from Django, and also bring in the user object. Then the next thing we do is we just basically derive our user profile model from Django models framework, as we've done in past tutorials, and say that it has a property called user. And we're going to give this a one-to-one field because we want to tie in the relationship between this model and the user model and only have one relationship. So one user can only have one user profile, and vice versa. One user profile can only be associated with one user. Then we're going to add in these extra fields that we normally use, because so far we've added the basics. If you never add another field to this model, this is the absolute basic minimum you need to associate with the user. So the next fields are nice to haves, so to speak. So I've added a property called likes cheese, and it's a boolean field, so it'll be a tick box on the page, so you can tick that true or false. And favorite hamster name. I'm feeling really creative with property names today, so if you're wondering why I said that, I put that, it's for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It's just that's what I thought of at the time. And it's a char field, so basically it's going to be some text, so you can probably write in, I don't know, your favorite name or whatever in there. Now the next line is an unusual bit of code that you may not understand immediately. What we're actually doing is we're saying that the user has a profile member variable or a property. Now that property doesn't actually exist yet, so we're more or less defining this new property. This profile property isn't part of the default functionality for user. We're adding this in, and what we're saying is it's a property, and what it should do is whenever you pass in a user object to this property, it'll shoot off and use our user profile model, run through its objects and fire off the get or create method. Now what this basically does is it says, if this object's in the database, get this object, and it should return a user profile object. If it's not in the database, it should create one. So it has two purposes, the get or create method. If it exists, it returns the existing one. If it doesn't exist, it returns a newly created record in the database to basically make sure that the user profile object that's returned isn't empty or equal to none. So we pass in the user just to say this particular property should be equal to you. So whenever we save this, it should then save the user in there, and it'll create a field in the database called user_ID, and that will be its foreign key. So it'll establish a relationship for us using that. So ideally what will happen is when we actually start accessing the user object, whenever we access its property called profile, this bit of code gets triggered, and it should automatically populate the profile member variable with a newly created user profile or one that already exists. It's a bit like magic. So you basically in the future, whenever you're using this, you probably won't really even have to remember that you did this. You just basically access that property there, as you'll see in the later example. And that's pretty much it. That's what we've got for our model. A little bit of definition and a little bit of magic. So the next step is basically to create a form that we'll be able to edit this information with. So inside of our user profile section, we've got our models, which we've just used, and also we've created a forms.py that we're going to edit. And inside of there, we're going to pull in Django Forms, and from the models module that we've got inside of our user profile folder, this one here, we're going to pull in our user profile object. And again, as we've done in previous tutorials, we're going to create a user profile form using the model form class. So we're going to derive from that. So it's not a bog standard form, it's a model form. Right, so with that, we again add in our metadata, and we're going to say the model is the user profile model, and the fields we're going to display are just the two fields, because we don't want to display our user for security reasons, and also it shouldn't really be the case that you do that. If someone's going to be using this form, they really should be logged in. So the system should already know who they are and who the user is. So we're not going to display the user in our form. We're going to presume that that person's logged in and that we can actually pull their information out of the database. So these two fields only are going to be displayed in our form. So there we go. That's our simple form done. And what we should see on here is a checkbox and a text box as well, so that we can tick that or for yes or no and feed in some text there. Okay, right. So we've got our settings, we know it's imported, we've created our model and defined it, we've got our forms. For the form, I'm going to create a nice template, and in there it's going to be more or less the same as all our other templates. It extends the base class and overrides the block called content, and in there we've got a heading, some area for some errors if there are any, and also we have our form definition which posts back to form profile, so that should be a URL that we're going to configure later on. Then we've got our CSRF token as usual for security, and then we've got our form printed out as a UL tag and a submit button which we're just going to say update with. So very simple base template for us to just edit the basic information for this profile. Right, so now that we've done that, we need to hook things up a little bit more. So in our URLs file, which is not the URLs file for the main site, it's the URLs file that we create inside of our user profile app, because we're keeping everything separate. We basically create a one-liner of a URL. So in there we create profile, and we say that it hooks into profile, user profile views, user profile, which is what we're going to define in a second. Now the second thing we need to do is, I haven't got it open right now, but let's just quickly find it. In our URLs for the main site, we're going to add in this extra line here, just in the same way as we imported the URLs from our articles module that we created earlier in the series. We're going to just pull in the URLs from this and say that it will all go under accounts. So what we should theoretically have is accounts profile as a URL on the end of there, because we've only created one of that. So if we go back to here, you'll also notice that in previous tutorials we set up accounts for our accounts URLs for our login and authentication views and logged out views. These are going to be added to, so these are not going to collide with each other, they will simply add in. Now what you have to be careful though is that you basically define a load of URLs in your user profile module, and then if you override them here, then they're obviously going to collide. So you know, there's a potential for some trouble there, so watch out for that and make sure that you don't override URLs from one URL file to another, otherwise you might wonder why you're getting the wrong page. So that's the one line that we add in there, just to include our user profile stuff. And the last thing we have to do is just basically define a view. So in the views file for our user profile app, I'm going to create the view, not in the main view file. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull in a few bits and bobs like we do in our other views files. We're just going to bring in our render to response function and our response redirect and the CSRF context processor, so that we can have secure forms. The next bit is to basically pull in the form from the user profile forms definition, and then we're going to use something different. Now you may or may not have come across decorators, but decorators are really useful because they allow you to add on functionality to forms, to functions that you've already created, so that you can extend a function's abilities without necessarily having to recode a lot of lines. So in the case of this, we've got login required. Now what does login required do? Well, when we define our function, we use the @ symbol login required just before we define the function, and this attaches to our user profile function, and automatically in the background it does the whole check-in to see whether the user's logged in, and if it's not logged in, it automatically does a redirect to the login page, and all of that just for basically putting one line in front of there. And it saves you absolutely ages in writing login confirmation code and all that sort of stuff. which you don't have to write over and over again, and you shouldn't have to anyway. So this is a nice, neat way of doing that, which basically stops you having to basically, recode stuff that's not necessary and that you do over and over again in lots of things. So if you have any views that you want to make secure and force a login, then just basically put this login required decorator at the front of of your functions, and they will basically check automatically and redirect if you're not logged in. And if you are logged in, then it'll allow this view to actually execute. So we've got our user profile view with its request object, and we're checking to see if it's got the method post, because we want to see if the form's actually been posted back, and if we are about to save the information. If we are, then we want to create a user profile form with the post data. But notice this, we've got a new command that we're adding in. We're saying instance equals request user profile. Now that's different. The reason why we're doing that is because we're saying that we want to populate this form with the original instance of the profile, so the model, profile model, and then we're going to actually insert the post information on top of that. Now we could potentially take all the member variables from form. For instance, in the models we defined that it's got likes cheese or favorite hamster name. We could go form dot likes cheese equals post such and such, and we could do it the long-winded way. We could potentially get this user profile object from here and then fill in its member variables also. So we could basically, say that likes cheese equals. But instead of doing that, we use a nice little feature from the forms class, which is basically that you just give it an instance of the class, and it will pre-populate it, and then with the post information, it'll overlay that into the member variables before you can save it. So it saves you a few lines of code where you would normally have to manually insert the values before you save. So if the form is valid, we just save and we redirect to the accounts logged in page. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because in the logged in page I've just added in a simple link that basically says click here to edit your profile information. So it's something that somebody would get when they first logged into the website. So that's basically an entry point to the profile editing page that I've put in there. So once it's saved, it's going to pass back to that page, so that we can click the link and go back to the profile editing page just to check that values have changed, and to make sure that it's not just a cached value from browser. The next bit is basically to get the user out of our request.user, and if you haven't seen that before, with a request, it stores the current logged in user, and if that's available, it can be basically a shortcut to getting your users. In fact, I think it's probably the preferred way to get the user information is through that. And from there, from the user, we get the profile. Now notice we are saying user.profile. By doing that there, we actually trigger this code that we were showing you earlier. So we trigger that code. So in this case, if there is no actual user profile created for this current user, just by doing that .profile command there, we're actually triggering Django to create the user and its profile. Not create the user. I'll correct myself. Create the user profile. It will create the user profile and populate that and push that back into our variable, and we get that for free. So this one little line of code here is actually making life way easier. So with that, we pass that instance in there, and the reason why we're doing that is because on our form we want to pre-populate any existing data, and if we've got a user with a profile already existing, it should put in the options that they've already selected in their user profile on a previous time. If they haven't, then it's just basically passing in an instance to say here's something to actually start with. Okay, so the next bit is basically what we do and very often in other tutorials. Just add in our CSRF and then add in the form and have it render to response using the template profile.html, and that's basically it. So with that, we've set up most of our code, we've created our model, we've created the form that goes with the model, then we've also set up in our settings.py, we've created the auth profile model, and also in our installed apps we've made sure that our app is in use and loaded in. Then we created our template, we hooked up our URLs, which is just one in this case, and they've created a view that will allow us to edit the profile information. Okay, so the next bit is to basically get the Django backend database stuff working. So the first thing we do, if I just run back in my commands because I've already done this myself, is we do manage.py schema migration user profile -- initial. If you haven't covered our South tutorial yet, then I would advise you to go back and have a look at that, because from now on we will be using South in the projects, just to show that it's part of the general workflow of how to develop. So this is what we do. We create an initial schema for the user profile. Then to apply that, we use migrate, and that should then apply whatever migration South has created, and then in your database you should now have a table called user profile _ user profile. I'll just demonstrate that now. If I could just find the database inside of there, I'll quickly show you. There we are, that's it there, and it's columns likes cheese, favorite hamster name, user ID, which is the foreign key table field, and an ID for this user table, and that should be what you see inside your database once you've done the migration. Okay, so once we've done that, we just need to basically run the server. And then from our browser we can visit the page, and you should see something along the lines like this. Okay, so I've already put information in there. We can untick that, see ham instead, and there we have it. It's saved the information and then redirected back to the logged in page, where we've got a link saying click here to edit the profile information. We can go back and you can see there that the options have changed. I'll save that again. Yeah, and it's definitely remembering our settings. So you can basically go as far as you like with this profile model that we've created, and add in various fields, address information, whatever, account balances if you want to do that sort of stuff. This is basically where you would store all that information. So I'm hoping that that's given you a good introduction on how to go a bit further than the default basic user information that you get out of the box. I hope this was informal. I'm not even sure if that's a word. I hope this was instructional for you. If you like this video, then please click the like button, And if you want to know any more about the further tutorials as they come out, then please click the subscribe button. I usually release one on a Friday. And also, just to give you a bit of a heads up, there is going to be some very good news very shortly from our guys at Wingware, who developed the IDE that I've been using. I've got some exciting news in that we may be, in fact we're not going to do that anything. We actually are going to have a special offer from them, which is probably going to be something along the lines of getting half the price of their IDE, the professional one, and also the personal version. So that will reduce your costs of buying the IDE from, I think it's for the personal version, it's about $45, so that's $22.50, and that's a pretty good chunk to have taken off, especially if you're getting serious about development. So I hope that you can take advantage of that, and there'll be details of that coming soon once I've had the chance to prepare a proper tutorial to just basically show you what exactly you're getting, more than you would if you just got the 101 version of Wingware. So it's going to be some awesome news. So thanks for watching.